Architectural Outcast.
Randy here from the Architectural Outcast. Architectural criticism is all about honesty, sometimes brutal honesty. All designs, no matter how good they might be, can be improved. But if you're going to help improve the design, that requires honesty, the willingness to point out all the flaws. You have to be willing to speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Now, I know I'm talking about the ideal world. Most architectural critics are obsequious lickspittles with their lips firmly planted on the posterior of the status quo. But not all. Architecture has a unique relationship with video games. Video games create visual worlds, and architecture is a key component in video game world building. You get the architecture wrong, your world building falls apart. This is particularly true in science fiction and fantasy worlds. There's a common misconception. A lot of people will say, "But Randy, it's a fantasy world. You can't hold it to the same standards as our world." No. A fantasy world is not a get out of jail free card. Architecture is all about communicating ideas and emotions. You can create an all-new architecture that has absolutely no relationship to existing precedent. But the audience, in this case the gamer, won't automatically, intuitively know what your architecture is trying to say. You're going to have to spend time and energy explaining to the audience, the gamer, what your architecture is saying. Time and energy you could be using for other things, like plot and character development. Most science fiction and fantasy video games use a mixture of fantastic and familiar architecture. The familiar architecture communicates information about the world without the audience, gamer, having to be explicitly told. The architecture is symbolic. It is legitimate to compare architecture put into a science fiction or fantasy world like Oblivion with real-world examples, because the fact that the building exists in our world is the reason it was put into that fantasy world in the first place. As I keep saying, if you're going to mess around with symbolism, you gotta know what you're doing. Skingrad is southwest of Imperial City. It's the first city you encounter when you take the Gold Road heading to Anvil. To start with, Skingrad has the exact same problem that every other city in Oblivion, pretty much every city in every video game, has ever had. It's too small and it doesn't have enough people. To be fair, this is mostly a technology and time issue. It just takes too much processing to show the urban environment at its proper scale. Even games like GTA, which start to get close to showing the vastness of the urban environment, don't have enough people. This comes down to time. Just don't have time to program all the people in doing all the activities they need to be doing to make the environment seem real. Oblivion cities are way too empty. There's not enough people. And it's to the point it's almost creepy. It's as if the cities are partially abandoned. The way the developers try to get around this problem is through distraction. They try to keep the players so busy with quests and other activities that hopefully they don't notice how empty the cities are. Skingrad's walls and defenses are fairy tale medieval castle, and it's set in a picturesque alpine environment. The walls as defense make sense. There's no moat, but a lot of cities didn't have moats, so not a problem. The location of the towers all makes sense as well. No obvious blind spots, so not a problem. The only real criticism I have are those buttresses. They shouldn't be there, or at least they shouldn't be on the outside of the walls. They give attackers too many opportunities. Unlike Imperial City, Skingrad gets its main gate, its front door, correct. Mostly. We're going to ignore all the weeds and grass. A city's main gate is its front door to the world. It's symbolic. And at a bare minimum, it should send two messages. First, we're awesome. And second, yeah, take your little army and move along. Skingrad's main gate is not a medieval gate. It's a 19th century Victorian romanticized interpretation of a medieval gate. It's too flat. It gets most of the details right, the flanking towers, the crenellations, the layered arches, but there should be a lot more depth to the structure. You enter into the city and you find it's divided into two sections. As far as defense goes, this is awesome. You've just broken through the main gate only to find yourself in a kill zone, attackers on all sides, and you gotta break through more gates. My only complaint is that the game doesn't do a very good job of explaining why the city's divided. Is it rich, poor, or is it a more uncomfortable reason why the city is so clearly segregated? Before we get into the actual architecture of Skingrad, I have to address these rocks. They're everywhere in the city, and they shouldn't be there. First off, this city is built out of stone, so why wouldn't they use these rocks as part of the construction? These rocks would not have been left in this defensive area of the city because it gives attackers too many places to hide. I have a question for y'all. How did they build the cathedral with that rock there? Skingrad gives the impression of being a prosperous, blue-collar, working-class, merchant-type city, and it has a lot of details that add believability to the world building. There are cobblestone streets, paved sidewalks, stone buildings with shingled roofs. There's a little park, complete with statuary. There are training grounds for the town's garrison. There are stone walls enclosing little backyards. Quick criticism. Wrought iron wasn't invented until after the Industrial Revolution. These gates are an anachronism. There's a stable in the city. Did you all know that in 1890, on the island of Manhattan alone, there were over 20,000 horse stables? With the associated manure that had to be removed from the city every single day? There are wells everywhere in the city. There's even a winery. Historically, wineries did a lot of their processes outdoors. Why? Sanitation. Sunlight is one of the world's best disinfectants. Skingrad does a very good job of giving the feel of medieval urban spaces. These buildings with the upper floors hanging out over the street were very common all over Europe. The reason why you extend your upper stories out over the street is so your building has more usable floor space. Putting in a balcony is more of a modern thing. It defeats the whole purpose of extending your floor out over the street in the first place. It also introduces another problem: structural issues. There are two main reasons why most cities ended up banning this practice. First off, it blocks the light. It makes the streets too dark. Second, structural. The buildings become unstable. They risk, one, just toppling over, landing on the other building, or two, those extended floors can shear off, crashing down into the street below. Hopefully, no one's underneath at the time. I can't tell you all how many times I had the experience of wandering around a historic city, England, France, Italy, Germany, and I had this exact same experience. Wandering through crowded, cramped, overhanging, dark streets, and then you have this view. Suddenly, you pop out into an open plaza, and you're faced with a major cathedral. Really well done, Bethesda. Another nice touch, you have a mixture of building materials. You have stone buildings, and mixed amongst them, wood buildings. You have a sense as the city got more prosperous over time, the building materials began to change. However, this is where things start to go haywire, where the world building begins to fall apart. The developers don't understand materiality. To paraphrase the great Louis Kahn, they don't understand what a brick wants to be, or wood. The wood buildings are post and beam construction with wattle and daub infill. Structurally, they're mostly right. The major criticism is there should be more cross bracing. In my previous video on Oblivion, I talked about how the developers' philosophical and aesthetic choices were causing issues that were snowballing to the point of being immersion breaking. Well, a prime example of that are these wood buildings in Skingrad, because they're a mess. I'm assuming that these wood buildings are where the poor live in Skingrad, but I'm not sure because the developers have chosen to show the majority of buildings all throughout Cyrodiil as being dilapidated and run down. When everything's dilapidated and run down, it no longer has any symbolic significance. If it's just one house in town that's dilapidated and run down, then maybe there's a story there. Is it abandoned? Has the family fallen on hard times? Is it haunted? There's a lot you can do with that. In Skingrad, just like everywhere else in Cyrodiil, every single wood house is a dilapidated dump, barely standing. If these houses are supposed to be where the poor live, this raises a whole nother issue. Apparently, the developers of the game think that poor people are too stupid and too incompetent to properly maintain their homes. The type of dilapidation is just dumb. First off, we have a contradiction. These buildings are shown to have glass windows. Glass would have been extremely expensive, but yet they're in buildings that are all but falling over. The wood is shown to be weathered like a split rail fence. Buildings don't weather in the same way. First off, they wouldn't use raw wood. More often than not, they'd char it. Helps preserve it, keep insects out, and then they would coat it with something. If nothing else, something as simple as beeswax. It wouldn't just fade, it would oxidize. I've already talked about in my previous video how boards are an anachronism. They didn't become common and cheap enough to be used in poor people's buildings until after the Industrial Revolution. The wood buildings in Skingrad have another problem, the way they read, which is fancy architectural language for how we interpret what the buildings are saying. Because the developers have chosen to show the daub falling out from the wattle, we read the bare wood sections as just the daub completely fallen away, making the buildings look even worse. A pile of wood would never be left to rot next to a wooden wall. It would introduce rot into the building. But then again, I guess the developers assume that poor people are too stupid to understand this concept. It's not believable that people would let their daub get in this condition. You have holes in your walls. Holes in walls means there are insects, mildew, mold, and rot in the structure. Rotten structures don't last long. And then there are the silly inconsistencies. On the outside, we have holes in the walls. On the inside, there are no holes in the walls, but there's mildew. Yeah, like people are going to be living in this space. And the wood, it's weathered like a split rail fence. How does that happen on the inside of a building? All these inconsistencies start to add up. You start to pay attention. You notice things. When you're looking around, what do you see? Boards butted up next to each other without any support. You can't walk upstairs because you'll fall through the floor. All the wood buildings in Skingrad have arched doorways. Why? You can't have arched doorways in wood buildings. Lots of historic examples. But it's not easy. You have to go through a lot of effort to put the arches in. Why? What purpose does it serve? We go back to Louis Kahn's famous question. What does a brick want to be? Louis Kahn had an answer to that question. A brick wants to be an arch. If the arch is the natural expression of masonry, why do all the wood buildings in Skingrad have arched doorways? Are the wood buildings copying the style of the masonry buildings? If that's the case, that means the masonry buildings came first, which then raises the question, why are the wood buildings in Skingrad in the first place? On the meta level, we know exactly why the wood buildings and the masonry buildings both have arched doorways. The developers use the same building assets. They just skinned them to look different. It's understandable. It saves the developers time and money. But that decision has royally screwed the masonry buildings. They're a mess. For starters, you have a building that has the form of post and beam construction, but it's built all out of masonry. Why? There are no natural benefits to doing this. It doesn't play into the strengths of masonry in any way. Are the stone buildings copying the wood buildings? There's lots of historic examples of that. Reference the Greek temples. But that would mean the wood buildings came first. But then why do the wood buildings have arched doorways? Your buildings are actively contradicting each other. And then there's just the stupid stuff. In post and beam construction, all the parts that stick out are the structure. So on the second floor, we're supposed to believe the wood structure is capable of holding up all those tons of rock? And then on the third floor, where's the structure? Now, to be fair, on the front facades, they've turned the post and beam construction into decoration. And it works, mostly, as long as you don't look too close, because there's still a lot of silliness going on. The developers realize that if you're going to have a big slab of stone sticking off the front of your building, you better support it. Well, they recognize that mostly because that center slab, it's not staying there very long. And if you look up, you couldn't pay me enough money to stand under that. With these long balconies, again, the developers realized they needed some sort of structure to hold up these stone slabs. But what they've shown can't exist. First off, the wood beams are turned the wrong way. Second, a wood beam can span at maximum 12 feet. Any more, they will buckle and snap under their own weight, much less the heavy load of a stone slab. And that's a lot more than 12 feet. And then there's the downright stupid, like making a keystone part of the support bracket holding up all that weight projecting from the front of the building. The last thing you want to do to an arch is put a twisting force on it. Well, unless you want to guarantee collapse. At the beginning of this video, I said that video games create visual worlds. That's a shorthand, a colloquial way of describing what's really going on. Video games allow people to imagine themselves in another world. A well-done video game becomes so evocative, it becomes easy for the player to transport themselves to another place and another time. People understand the built world. They know how it works. And every time a developer makes a mistake, it just becomes another hurdle the player has to overcome in order to be able to transport themselves to a different time and a different place. Video game worlds are 100% symbolic. And we go back to what I always say. If you're going to mess around with symbolism, you better know what you're doing. At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about. And until next time, y'all be safe. If y'all are still here, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. While you're at it, why don't you like this video, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell. You can hear me yammer on about something else next time. And feel free to share this video far and wide.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.